Yes, hello dear students, we would like to welcome you to lesson 2. The topic is chemicals of life, and in the first lesson we introduced the definition of chemicals of life. We also said that there are two categories of chemicals of life, where we discussed about organic chemicals of life and then inorganic chemicals of life. And we started with the inorganic, where we talked about water, and we discussed about properties of water and also the functions of water in living systems. So we want to stick to inorganic chemicals of life for now by discussing about the mineral ions. So mineral ions also belong to the inorganic chemicals of life, and the mineral ions are very many, as you can see there. Those are some of them that our bodies need. So, but before that, before we go into much detail, let's start with outlining the roles of mineral ions in biological systems. So we want to look at the roles of the minerals and the ions in biological systems. So the first role is they are components of smaller molecules, like phosphorus is contained in ATP, and iodine is contained in thyroxin hormone. So when you look at the molecule of ATP there, you realize that it has 3 phosphorus ions, and is a very key component of that molecule. And of course, ATP is an energy reserve in our bodies. Secondly, the mineral ions are constituents of large molecules as well. Large molecules like proteins that contain nitrogen, sulphur, and we also have phospholipids that contain phosphorus. We have other molecules like nucleic acid, like DNA and RNA that contain nitrogen and phosphorus. So mineral ions are equally very important because they are components of large molecules like proteins, phospholipids, and mineral and nucleic acids. And then we have, they are also components of pigments. For example, hemoglobin, the hemoglobin pigment that has high affinity for oxygen in the red blood cells, contains iron or ion. And then also cytochromes, which are also pigments within the body, also contain iron. Chlorophyll, which is found in plants, contains magnesium. So these mineral ions are also found in pigments, both in plants and also in animals. Like you can see there the structure of hemoglobin, and in the center you can see iron as a central atom there. The fourth role of minerals is they act as metabolic activators. For example, in ATP which is adenosine triphosphate, activates glucose before it is broken down in cell respiration. You remember the process in glycolysis, where ATP is an activator of glucose before the reaction takes place. Calcium ions also activate the enzyme called ATPase during muscle contraction. So, and many other processes in the body require activation, which is done by the mineral ions. So, when in muscle contraction, we require ATPase enzyme. This enzyme is activated by the calcium ions. The fifth role of mineral ions or minerals is that they determine the anion-cation balance in our bodies. Sodium, potassium, and calcium are important in the transmission of impulses and also in the muscle contraction. So in the muscle contraction, we require calcium, as we saw earlier, but also sodium and potassium play a very big role in impulse transmission during coordination in the body. as you can see there in that diagram. And then number 6 is that they determine the osmotic pressure and water potential so that it does not fluctuate beyond the narrow limits. For example, sodium, potassium, and chlorine or chloride ions are involved in water balance in the kidneys. Remember, in the kidney nephron, there is a homeostatic activity taking place where there is reabsorption of water so that the body does not lose more water than it needs. So that one is only achieved because of the presence of sodium, potassium, and chloride ions that are involved there to constitute the necessary osmotic potential, osmotic pressure required to maintain the water quantity in the body. And then they are also constituents of structures in the cell membranes, cell walls, bones, enamel, and shells. So of course you know that the bones, the process of calcification or the process of ossification, formation of bones, you remember that calcium plays a very big role and it's a component of bones. In cell membranes, you remember we have the phospholipid bilayers that are made up of phosphorus. Enamel and shells equally have mineral ions. So we cannot distinguish, we cannot isolate the structures from the minerals. So those are some of the roles of minerals and ions in biological systems. The assignment for you is that you go and write these roles, outline them and explain them, and then you send for me your summary. I want to thank you for listening, and I want to meet you in the next lesson.